What if I told you that the American Rebellion did not truly begin with gunfire at Lexington, nor with lofty words about liberty carved into parchment, but with a quiet, spreading realization that we were being pushed back into a smaller life than the one we had already built? What if the real spark was not hatred of the king, but fear of losing a future we could already see with our own eyes?
I was born a subject of Britain, and for many years I was proud of it. My father used to say that being British meant order, law that reached even across the ocean, protection from chaos, and a sense that the world, however vast, had a center. In our small town along the Atlantic coast, portraits of the king hung in meeting halls, and his name was spoken with respect. We drank British tea, read British newspapers weeks late, and measured our lives by British standards. Yet our days were not British at all. The land here was wider than anything I had ever imagined. Forests stretched farther than the eye could see. Rivers ran like living highways, and soil, dark, forgiving soil, waited for anyone willing to work it. We were farmers, traders, carpenters, sailors. We built homes with our own hands and towns with our own rules. No lord owned our fields. No bishop dictated our prayers. Survival itself demanded independence, even when our loyalties remained tied to the crown. For a long time, Britain barely noticed us, and in that neglect, we grew. Local assemblies debated taxes, merchants formed networks across colonies, men argued fiercely in taverns about trade, faith, and law. We were British subjects, yes, but British subjects who had learned to govern ourselves simply because no one else would do it for us. That, I believe now, was the beginning of the end.
The trouble did not arrive all at once. It crept in, wrapped in official language and stamped documents. After Britain's long and costly war with France, everything changed. Soldiers appeared where there had been none. Officials arrived with new authority. Laws were announced from across the ocean, written by men who had never walked our roads or planted crops in our soil. At first, the new taxes seemed small. A stamp here, a duty there. Britain, we were told, needed revenue. The war had been fought, after all, to protect us. But something felt wrong. We were being taxed by a parliament in which we had no voice. Decisions about our trade, our money, our borders were made by men who neither knew us nor needed our approval. When we protested, they spoke as if we were unruly children, ungrateful, naive, and in need of discipline. It was not the cost of the taxes that angered us most. Many of us could afford them. It was the meaning behind them. For the first time, Britain was asserting not just protection over us, but control. What truly unsettled people like me was not a single law, but a pattern. Trade restrictions tightened. We were told whom we could trade with and what ships we could use. Our paper money lost value by royal decree. Land beyond certain borders, land we had dreamed of settling, land some of us had already bled for, was suddenly forbidden. It felt as though a hand had reached across the ocean and closed around our future. Taverns grew louder. Pamphlets spread faster than rumors. Words like rights and representation were no longer abstract ideas debated by scholars. They became personal. Men asked, if we can govern ourselves here, why should strangers rule us from afar? The British response only deepened the divide. Troops were stationed among civilians. Houses were searched. Ships were seized. Punishments were collective, swift, and humiliating. And still, many of us hesitated.
We did not wake up one morning wanting rebellion. We wanted respect. We wanted recognition of what we had become. But Britain did not see a growing society. It saw a possession slipping out of reach.
The turning point for me came not with violence, but with clarity. I stood one evening listening to a speaker in the town square. His voice carried not anger, but certainty. He spoke of how power behaves when it feels threatened, how empires tighten their grip, not because their subjects are weak, but because they are strong. That night, I understood something that chilled me. Britain was not afraid of our disobedience. Britain was afraid of our success. We were no longer dependent colonies clinging to the crown for survival. We were communities capable of standing on our own. Our farms fed us. Our ships carried goods across oceans. Our assemblies governed daily life. Independence was no longer a dream. It was a possibility. And possibility is dangerous to an empire. When shots were finally fired, they were not the cause of rebellion. They were its confirmation. By then, the break had already happened in our minds. We were no longer asking for permission. We were deciding our own fate. The war that followed was brutal, uncertain, and terrifying. But it was fueled by something stronger than rage, the belief that the life we had built here belonged to us.
When independence was finally declared, it felt less like a sudden leap and more like a door we had already been standing beside for years. The real reason we broke from Britain was not a single tax, a single protest, or even a single battle. It was the collision between an empire that demanded obedience and a society that had already learned self-rule. Empires tolerate distance only when it does not threaten authority. Britain ignored us while we were weak and tried to control us once we grew strong. The lesson I carry, even now, is this: revolutions are rarely born from hatred alone. They are born when people glimpse a future that power refuses to allow them to reach. We did not rise because we despised Britain. We rose because we had outgrown it.